Okay, so starting off today's show, we will be doing the same thing that we do every Monday throughout the college basketball season here on the Zach Kroll Sports Podcast, and that will be to go over my 10 main takeaways from week 3 of the college basketball season. It's crazy that the season's already in week 3. We're going to be at March before we know it. So without further ado, conference play has started in some places. It's still about to start in others. It's going to be a lot of fun, very exciting. Without further ado, boys, hit the music. Here we go. Takeaway number 1. I'm praying for Kiante Johnson, man, and I just really hope he's okay. I was watching the Florida State game, and it was crazy. Florida had a nice little run. Kiante had a nice dunk. They called the timeout, and then all of a sudden, the cameras were a little they were going around the Florida bench, and no one really had any idea what was going on. And all of a sudden, the news broke, and he's been apparently in stable but critical condition. And I just hope he's okay. It really shows you that in 2020, playing in a pandemic, some things are bigger than basketball. And I don't want to rush to any conclusions in terms of if Kiante, what happened, had to do with COVID or not. But at the same time, the bottom line is we all just have to pray for him and hope he's okay. Because we know that playing basketball, it's so much fun. And in a time like this, a lot of people use it as just a way to forget about things in the outside world and really realize what's important in life. And I'm sure that's all Kiante was doing. I'm sure he loved basketball, and I just really hope he's going to be okay. And you could tell in the game his teammates were flustered. Props to Mike White for keep on playing the game. Apparently Leonard Hamilton offered him as well, and it was respectful for both sides to consult. And Kiante was taken to the hospital in Tallahassee, and once again, I just really hope that he's okay. Takeaway number 2. One of the best games that I watched this weekend was on Friday night between UCLA and Marquette. And I totally understand. I was very high on the Bruins in the preseason, and I watched them on opening night get absolutely embarrassed by San Diego State. The Aztecs, as we know, though, are a very good team, and I think the Bruins, watching them on Friday night against Marquette, gave me some positive signals going forward. Number 1, I think the Pac-12 is wide open. There are many teams in that league that have shown signals, but at the same time are very inconsistent. I think UCLA, the way they're built, with their veterans of Chris Smith, who didn't even play well against Marquette the other night. He had 1 point and he got it late in the second half. But Tiger Campbell and Jaime Jaquez and Cody Riley and Jalen Hill, Jake Kyman, Jules Bernard was awesome on Friday for UCLA against Marquette. There are many guys on this UCLA team that have a lot of potential, but are very unselfish and unproven, and I think that reflects on the good coaching job Mick Cronin has done since he's gotten to Westwood. Let's not forget that UCLA last season was really one of the hotter teams in college basketball going into the NCAA tournament and championship week. Unfortunately, we all know we have no idea what would have happened with the Bruins, but odds are I thought they would have made the NCAA tournament. And the bottom line is Mick Cronin right now is doing things at UCLA that Steve Alford never did. That's including beating teams you're supposed to beat. Marquette is a really good team. DJ Carton and Kobe McEwen both played really well on Friday night, as did Theo John. UCLA was able to take some punches and still look good, respond, and get the W. And especially when you consider what happened to the Bruins against San Diego State, that's a really good sign for Bruin fans. I think the Pac-12 is wide open and the Bruins are there for the taking. Takeaway number 3. Iowa is really good. Right now, you can make the argument that they have the best offense in college basketball. And watching them against North Carolina, I'll admit, I thought the Tar Heels were going to win that game. I thought their veteran experience could at least limit Iowa's shooting. But as you guys know, that's not what happened. As in the first 10 minutes of the game, it really felt like Iowa could not miss a 3-point shot. Garza didn't even play that well. But guys like CJ Frederick, Joe Wieskamp, Jordan Bohannon, veterans that have been on this Iowa team for a while, they are really doing a nice job of getting the job done. And I feel like when you look at this Hawkeye team, I'll admit, I have them right now in my top 25 at number 5, and that's a little higher than most people would expect. And I'm not denying they're good. They're not good, excuse me. I think that when you look at this Iowa Hawkeye team, it is Fran McCaffrey's best chance to get to a Final Four since he's been the head coach of the Hawkeyes. But at the same time, I want to see them get punched in the mouth a little bit and have a night where they're not shooting a million threes and making them and getting the job done. I want to see Iowa beat Gonzaga. If they beat Gonzaga, I will be totally willing to put them at least at number 2, maybe number 1 in the country. We also know the Big Ten is just such a good league, and you're going to have nights there where you lose games that, quite frankly, it's not like you weren't supposed to lose, but, Iowa losing to Rutgers or Iowa losing to Ohio State, Iowa losing to anyone in the Big Ten, it's going to happen. So I'm just not as high on the Hawkeyes as most people, but at the same time, I did watch Luka Garza just bully Solomon Young on Friday night in the Cy-Hawk game. That wasn't even fair. And they're a good team, man. They really shoot the three ball well. They play a very entertaining and fun brand of basketball. And I do think when you look at the Hawkeyes in the Big Ten, it's going to be very interesting when they play in Illinois or when they play at Wisconsin or Michigan State, because the styles are very contrast going forward. Going on to takeaway number 4, Bobby Hurley is an overrated coach. There, I said it. A lot of people are saying, when Coach K retires, Bobby Hurley is going to be the guy that replaces him, and he is a Duke guy. He's the perfect guy for the job. But at the same time, what I'll say is this. I think Bobby Hurley, when you look at the job he's done at Arizona State in terms of building the program, I think he deserves credit in that aspect. I think Arizona State is in a much better place right now than when they were when he first got there. But at the same time, that doesn't diminish the fact that this guy has had so much talent on many of his past teams, and they haven't been able to get the job done. I was someone that had Arizona State as a top 15 team in my top 25 this year. And usually, I'm not the biggest Bobby Hurley guy. We all remember a couple years ago when they went into Fog Allen and beat Kansas. They beat Xavier, and they had one of the best non-conference slates of all time in the history of college basketball. And then somehow, some way, in a very bad Pac-12, they barely managed to make the NCAA tournament. That's not very good if you're a Sun Devil fan. They ended up losing in the first 4 to Syracuse. The next year, they beat St. John's in Dayton and then lose to Buffalo, ironically, where was the place Bobby Hurley came from. And then this year, watching them against San Diego State, that game wasn't even close. The Aztecs were the significantly better team. And Bobby Hurley in this Pac-12, which is wide open at the top, I think UCLA is really good. I think Oregon's solid, Stanford, USC. But there's no reason why the Arizona State Sun Devils should not be at the top of the Pac-12. And considering all the talent on this team, I think Bobby Hurley just needs to flat out do a better job. And for San Diego State, man, that's a really good basketball team. I have them at number 9 in my top 25 right now. Brian Dutcher deserves a lot of credit losing Malachi Flynn, and it doesn't look like they lost a beat. Jordan Shackle and Matt Mitchell, 2 ballers. Nathan Mensah as well. Takeaway number 5. Missouri. Who could have seen this one coming? I feel like every year there's a team that is very good that no one could have seen coming. And I had Missouri at number 8 in my preseason top 25. In my preseason SEC poll out of 14 teams. And I was really impressed with the way they played against Illinois. They also had a really nice win over Oregon earlier in the non-conference slate. And I say it all the time. Talent doesn't always win in college basketball. Sometimes it's experience that gets the job done. And when you look at this Missouri squad, we're going to talk about it in detail a little later in the show, but they returned their top 7 scorers from last year's squad, 84% of their scoring, and you could see how the other night, along with Konzo Martin, their head coach, they were really on the same page, and they deserve a lot of credit for the way they played against Illinois. They took punch for punch. Ayo Dosunmu was literally unconscious. He had 36 in total. Illinois made runs, Missouri made runs, but somehow, some way, the Tigers were able to get the job done. And I have Missouri right now ranked at number 10 in my top 25, and talk about the SEC. That's another league that's been wide open, I think. Tennessee is really good, but let's face it, they've only played 2 games. We don't know how good exactly they are yet. And I think the top of the SEC is wide open with the way Kentucky, LSU, Alabama, the way all those teams have played. I think it is totally reasonable to think that maybe the Missouri Tigers could find themselves right in that conversation in the top of the SEC. Conzo Martin is a coach that he's very hit or miss, I think. I think at each of his jobs, he's had one really successful run. And I think this year at Missouri, it could be the year where it happens. And he deserves credit because going into the season, I was semi-doubtful about the way this Missouri team was looking. But they're a really good basketball team, and they proved it against Illinois. Takeaway number 6. Chris Collins and Northwestern, man. I don't know what was going on against Pitt, but it was basically the same exact thing as last season. And if you missed the game, Northwestern was playing Pitt on Wednesday night in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. Northwestern actually played pretty well. Their offense looked really good. Miller Kopp, Bo Bowie, Ryan Young, they were playing awesome, and they were winning the whole game. And then late in the game, they were up by 2, and they just turned the ball over, and Justin Champagnie ended up being the best player on the floor per Pitt, and Northwestern lost the game. And Chris Collins, I mean, the thing about Northwestern is this. Everyone agrees they're the worst team in the Big Ten. From a talent perspective, like, no one's denying that, or at least have been in the last couple of years. But at the same time, it's not like being the worst team in the Big Ten means you can't win basketball games. I expected Northwestern to beat Pitt in the ACC Big Ten Challenge, and they should have, to be honest. They were the better basketball team. But once again, like so many times last year, Northwestern blows a game where they should win late. And that's on the coach, man. We all remember Chris Collins led Northwestern to their first NCAA tournament appearance ever, and everyone was like, oh, they're really building something special here. He's in for a great run. He could be the next head coach at Duke, possibly. And what has he done since then? Nothing. I think he is a coach that should be on the hot seat. And to be honest, I think his coaching could be a reason why Northwestern could really finish towards the bottom of the Big Ten. And when I mean at the bottom of the Big Ten, I mean in last place. Because I know Nebraska isn't great right now, but they have talent. I think flat out Fred Hoiberg is a better coach than Chris Collins. We know Penn State has some talent. Minnesota has some talent. I'm not a believer in this Northwestern team going forward, and I won't be unless they really show me that they could correct their end-of-game mismanagements. Takeaway number 7. Duke. Not a very good basketball team right now, are they? And we all saw them play against Michigan State, and when I watched Duke, it made me feel a lot of Kentucky vibes. A team with a great coach, obviously, but a team that is just a lot of young kids. Let's face it, with the pandemic offseason, they haven't had much practice time. But here's the thing. Coach K was the one that decided to bring his kids back later than basically every other coach in college basketball. And we're going to get into his comments and Nate Oates and all that later in the show. But the bottom line is Duke right now just looks like a bunch of freshmen that don't really know what's going on. They have to get used to playing with each other. And I do think by season's end, maybe they could turn it around. I think Jalen Johnson's a really good player. I think Matt Hurt has looked okay, but they need a point guard to start. Jeremy Roach has been fine, but I don't really know how he is going to be going forward as a ball distributor. I think DJ Stewart could be a guy that develops a nice three-point shot and could be their consistent shooter. But at the same time, when you watch Duke against Illinois, man, it wasn't even close. The Illini were the significantly better team, and I'm not saying Duke is never going to figure this out, but kind of similar to Kentucky, they are going to have a lot to fix going forward, and we'll see what Coach K is up to, man, because his comments obviously disturbed a lot of people. Not disturbed, but rubbed some people the wrong way. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this podcast have the mindset, whatever it takes, we want to play basketball. And let's see how Coach K does it, man. He's probably the best college basketball coach of all time. We know the success he's been able to have at Duke, the brand he's been able to turn the Blue Devils back into. But at the same time, watching Duke, I don't know how you could watch them and not have any concerns right now. They're not a very good basketball team. They got blown out by Illinois. They didn't look good at all against Michigan State. And the Spartans, to be honest, didn't even impress me that much in that game. I don't think they really played that well in the big picture. But Duke is outside my top 25 right now. Not a good basketball team. Takeaway number 8. I'll tell you who is a very good basketball team in the ACC. And that is Brad Brownell and the Clemson Tigers. Clemson is the most unselfish team I've watched in college basketball this season. They are a bunch of dudes that will do whatever it takes to win. I saw them the first week of the season blow out Mississippi State and blow out Purdue. And blowing those two teams out are one thing, fine. They then blow out Maryland and they beat up on Alabama. They were winning the whole game. And you guys know, historically, I'm not a Brad Brownell guy. I think he's had many teams over the past couple of years that have failed. But this team might be different, man. I'm telling you. Amir Sims is a guy that could be a legitimately good player on a Final Four team. Their guards, Al-Amir Dawes, a point guard that has plenty of experience. Clyde Trapp, James Newman, those guys could play. They have a dead-eye shooter by the name of Hunter Tyson, who was balling out against Alabama. They even have a top 100 freshman that's getting better and better by the day in PJ Hall. Jonathan Byer is an experienced transfer that does the dirty work for them. Watch out for Clemson, man. I'm telling you, that is a really good basketball team, and I think they're one of the 15 best teams in the country and have a legitimate shot at winning the ACC. I said it. Clemson could win the ACC, folks. And keep in mind, I was a guy that had Clemson before the season, finishing in 10th place. I've watched them 4 games. They're legitimately good. Trust me. And the way they played against Alabama, and this is an Alabama team I really liked. I actually predicted Alabama to win the game beforehand. Clemson didn't look phased at all, man. They really didn't. And it is so amazing to watch how Brad Brownell, historically a coach that hasn't really been able to get the job done, it's amazing to see what he's been able to do. Him and the Clemson players deserve a lot of credit for the job they've done so far this season. Takeaway number 9. When I was talking about Duke, I briefly mentioned some Kentucky comments, and I'll continue with those here. We all saw Kentucky lose to Richmond. They played okay in the first half, really weren't able to do much after that. Kentucky did not play well against Kansas. That was an ugly loss. Kentucky did not play well against Georgia Tech. That was an ugly loss. But what I will say is this. In the first half of this Notre Dame game, Kentucky did not play well at all. They sucked. I believe Notre Dame went on a 17-0 run. When you're Kentucky and you're playing at Rupp Arena, fans or not, the other team, no matter who you're playing, should never go on a 17-0 run. But at the same time, what I will say is this. In the second half, Kentucky did show me some signs. Olivier Sarr finally looked like the guy that was expected to be, that we all expected to be in the preseason. You also look at the way that B.J. Boston and Terrence Clark played. They showed some flashes. Devin Askew even made a 3. That's something not a lot of Kentucky fans expected. And keep in mind, Keon Brooks is still hurt. So maybe when he gets back, this Kentucky team could regroup going into SEC play. But at the same time, they have to build on this, man. They can't just go out there after this Notre Dame loss and say, oh, we only lost by 1, we're getting better. We have full confidence. You have to play with so much urgency because right now, Kentucky is 1-4. And John Calipari is super embarrassed about that. I know it. He doesn't want to be 1-4. The fan base doesn't want to be 1-4. And the bottom line is this. You still have to play UCLA before you get into conference play. That game is in Cleveland. I just spoke about UCLA in a previous take on the show. So the Bruins are a really good team. They're an older team full of experienced dudes that will do whatever it takes to get the job done. Is Kentucky going to be able to beat them? I don't know, man. I really don't. And I was a guy that picked Kentucky to win the national championship before the season started. Luckily for them, I still think the SEC is wide open, and maybe by March, Calipari will have his guys rolling just like he usually does. But that Notre Dame game, man, in the beginning, it showed me a lot of concerns to have about this Kentucky team. But at the same time, let's see how they do in SEC play. John Calipari, everyone trusts him, even though some Kentucky fans are upset. We'll see how the Cats do going forward. And takeaway number 10. The Miami Hurricanes had a roller coaster week. So, in the Big Ten ACC Challenge, Miami's playing Purdue. I literally turned the game on. It's 32-12 Purdue at half. I was like, what? And I understand Chris Likes, their point guard, all ACC kind of player. He was out, but at the same time, 32-12 at home? For a team like Miami that I picked to make the NCAA tournament before the season started, that should never happen. But somehow, some way, Isaiah Wong and Harlan Beverly and Nasir Brooks lead the comeback, and Miami ends up getting the win over Purdue. And Purdue's in a lot of trouble, and playing in the Big Ten, I think they are in serious danger of missing the NCAA tournament, but we'll see how they do going forward. They still have plenty of opportunities to redeem themselves. But then Miami goes out there on Saturday, and they lose to Florida Gulf Coast at home? Come on. That can't happen. If you want to make the NCAA tournament, you can't lose to Florida Gulf Coast at home, especially coming off a big win over Purdue. And Miami's in the ACC. to be honest, the ACC has been a little bit better than I've expected. Even though Duke and Virginia have been significantly worse than I've expected, I still think UNC is a really good basketball team. I think Florida State's a really good basketball team. I think Clemson's a really good basketball team. I think Louisville's a really good basketball team. I think Syracuse is a good basketball team. They shot the lights out against Boston College the other night. NC State is on COVID pause right now. I think they could be pretty good. So there's still plenty of open opportunities in this ACC, but if Miami is going out here losing games to Florida Gulf Coast, I think they could have a hard time making the NCAA tournament, and hopefully Chris Lex will be able to get healthy, and him, Beverly Wong, or the freshman Earl Timberlake, hopefully he'll be able to get healthy as well, and Miami will make their way towards the NCAA tournament. But the league is tough, man, and it's a big season for Coach Larinaga. I think he wants to make the tournament with this group. It's very talented.